For this week's discussion post, I have chosen to talk about Betsy Ross, who was the subject of the article that we were assigned to read. As you can see, I've got the Betsy Ross flag here waving behind me. I typically have just a regular American flag there, but for this week's discussion board, I went ahead and got a Betsy Ross flag and put it up there so we could have that as a visual today. I enjoy doing these discussion board videos. I did my first one on Independence Day with fireworks in the background and whatnot. And then this one with the Betsy Ross flag. I'm looking forward to the next one when we travel to a historic site. There's one that's a few hours from here that we're going to go to and film the content there. But in looking at the article about Betsy Ross, there's 4 questions that we're supposed to kind of address here. And I believe that a woman from another profession could have filled her role as an iconic figure from the revolution in some other way. It's just that the role of women in society at the time was so centered around the home and domestic issues and domestic work that it just makes sense that a woman who had a profession that worked out of the home would be this iconic figure from the revolution. There weren't very many women who were involved in the major political issues or military leaders or anything like that. So it'd be difficult to find a woman in that role that would be able to surpass Betsy Ross and her the legend of Betsy Ross. There's an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer from December of 2018 where it describes that how every middle schooler in the Philadelphia area has been to the Betsy Ross house on a field trip at some point or another, and they've seen her there, or a mannequin of her, that is, working as a seamstress on creating this flag. So it just kind of is embedded in the Betsy Ross legend. I feel that it would be more difficult to find a more iconic figure from the revolution, just because, or from a different profession, that is. Having a famous female such as Betsy Ross from the American Revolution is important for representation purposes. Most school children know the names of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams et al. But when it comes to female figures, the one name that jumps out or that most people would know would be Betsy Ross. They're hard pressed to find a more iconic female figure from the American Revolution. When it comes to representation, we hear a lot about representation when it comes to history and storytelling right now. So obviously, it's important that a woman like Betsy Ross is represented from the American Revolution. Aside from her, like I said, there's just the list that we had, and there aren't a whole lot of others to choose from. One of my sources was a book review written by Sarah Damiano, and in the book review, it's a book called "Women of the American Revolution: Gender Politics and the Domestic World." She discusses how the author described the domain of women in the American Revolution as being in the domestic household. So this being the case, it really limited how prominent of role women could have in the history books in this regard. A lot of them are not as well known to people or to historians even. However, their role in the domestic sphere can't be diminished in any way in their support of the war. Next, the question talked about Elizabeth Claypool, and does this diminish Betsy Ross's legend in any way? Really, the grandson went on to really play up this legend of Betsy Ross decades after her death. But I guess the issue is, you've got Elizabeth Claypool. That's the real person. It's not known as the Elizabeth Claypool flag. It's known as the Betsy Ross flag. Obviously, it just probably doesn't have quite the same ring to it. I feel like this article doesn't diminish the role of Betsy Ross. And more so, what it does is it kind of increases that legend. It makes it where it gives it a lot more, a lot more reality, if you would. But again, I mean, that Betsy Ross, that name just kind of has a ring to it. So if it were called the Elizabeth Claypool flag, would it have lasted as long? Would people know it as such? I don't know. Lastly, if you look at the article, one might think that Betsy Ross is not really who we thought she was, but and there's a lot of embellishment, I guess, there. However, these legends happen to have some truth to it, so I believe that this article doesn't diminish the truth about Betsy Ross necessarily, but it actually helps perpetuate that legend a little bit more, especially for historians to have something that we can use to really hang our hats on when it comes to talking about Betsy Ross and the role of women in the Revolution. Thanks.